Hi again, my Real Art Ways Park Art friends. I hope that you are ready to have some fun with color today. And the word that we are going to focus on is the word value. The meaning of value is all the lights and darks of a certain color. Both to help you understand value is by looking at this apple. You can see all the lights and darks of the color red. Here's the same apple. Even though the color's gone, you can still see its value. All the way from the lightest white to the grays to the darkest black. Here's another example. Let's take a look at Van Gogh's Starry Night. Let's zoom in. When you zoom in, you can clearly see from light blue all the way up to dark blue. You can also see light yellows all the way up to dark yellows. So these are examples of different values of blue and different values of yellow. Materials that you'll need for today's project are the white watercolor paper, a pencil, watercolors, brushes, a cup of water to wash your brush with, and things that aren't necessary but could be helpful are a black marker and a paper towel to dry your brushes. Once you have all your materials, the first step will be to find a small object of any shape that you can trace over and over again on your paper. This person found something that was a circle that they could trace all over their paper. What are you going to find? Here are some ideas. Maybe like that example, you want to find a circle that you can then put down on your paper and trace. I've also found some other objects. I got a leaf. You could find the leaf outside, or this one I took actually off of one of my house plants. You could get a little creative and trace the outline of your sunglasses. You could even get kind of silly and trace the outline of a thing of toothpaste. Or maybe even a spoon. Any objects that you could fit repeatedly on your paper would work. What did you find? I think I'm going to use the leaf. You could trace more than one object, but I think it's best to just choose one. And again, I chose my leaf. I'm actually going to pinch off the bottom of that stem because this would be almost too challenging to trace every time. So I'm going to just leave it like this. And what I want to do is I want to trace this leaf over and over again at many different angles all over my paper. I want to cover every part of my paper. And when we trace, you want to go slowly right around the entire edge of your object. It's okay if it's not totally perfect. You're going to have this leaf, or whatever object you chose, go over and over all over your entire page. So now would probably be a great time to pause your video to trace whatever object you chose all over your page. Notice how I changed the angle. It was facing this way and then facing that way. And also notice how I overlapped them. That's what you're going to want to do. Overlap your object, meaning that part of this trace goes on top of another trace. Overlap your object as you trace it. Just like that. But you want to do it so it covers your whole page. All right, I'm going to trace my leaf. You can pause the video and trace whatever object that you chose. Have fun. So the next step is to choose any color from your watercolor palette, and we're going to create a range of values of that one color. Now, even though I have leaves here, you'd think the obvious color to choose would be green. I'm actually going to choose the color red. You might have slightly different colors than me in your watercolor palette. That's okay. Choose a color from your palette that you like. So again, I'm going to choose this color red, and I'm going to show you how we can create the darker shades of that color as well as the lighter tints. So from tracing, we've created a lot of open spaces throughout our piece. Here's an open space, here's a space, right? So we have all these different sections in our traced, on our traced paper. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start with getting my red nice and wet. So I'm gonna take my cup of water and my brush and just put a lot of water on whatever color that you chose. All right, so my red is nice and wet, right? You can see that it's wet, so it's nice and wet. And so now I'm going to choose some of the open spaces and I'm gonna paint it with just my pure red. So using this pure red, also known as the red hue, I'm going to choose lots of the open spaces across my paper to color in, to paint in with that pure red color. Right, so there's one with that pure red. You can see that it's a true red. Okay, and then here is another one that I'll paint with that red. What you want to do when you are using this one color, you want to try to choose sections of your page that aren't touching, right? So I'm not going to paint this the same color red as I'm going to paint that, right? Because those are right next to each other, but I can paint these two the same exact color because they're not touching. You'll see why as we continue. Okay, so all over, and really you want to keep your red paint, your red watercolor right here nice and wet. So every time that you dip it in, you're getting a nice wet brush. All right, so those two aren't next to each other, and this one is also separate. So I'll paint this one, fill that in with that red hue, that pure red color. Right, I'm saying it's a pure red color because I haven't done anything to it. I haven't added extra water to it. I haven't added white to make a tint. I haven't added black to make a shade. Right now it's just the red right from the watercolor palette right onto my paper. So I'm going to take some time to fill in the open spaces all around my whole piece. Again, spaces that aren't touching with this red hue. You should do the same. It's going to take some time, so pause your video and paint all of your pure color for whatever color that you chose for those open spaces across your whole piece. So now I have all of my red hues painted. I'm actually going to add a little bit in this tiny little space too. Don't forget the really, really small spaces. One thing that you want to think about too while you're doing this is sometimes if you notice that some areas, maybe they're appearing a little bit lighter than the other parts, even though you feel that you're just using that red hue, just go paint over it again. Maybe your brush isn't wet enough, so just dip it right back into that pure color and then go back over. Again, your goal is to just, whenever you're working with one certain value of the color, your goal is to just have all those spaces to be as close to the same value of the color as possible. All right, so I have all of my pure red hues done on this piece, and now what we're gonna do next, we are going to work on the shades. Now, if we remember correctly, to make a shade of a color, you add black. So make sure that your brush is nice and clean. You could even use another brush if you prefer. And again, we're gonna add black to our color red to make a slightly darker shade of that color. Now, I don't wanna just wet this and then put black right in there because then I'm gonna ruin my red. So what we're gonna do is you can make a nice big puddle. And again, you probably wanna, it can't hurt to make it on the larger side, maybe even a little bit more than you need so that you know that you have enough. Otherwise, you can just make it again. No worries, but I'm getting a lot of this red, and again, my red has to be pretty wet. You can see there's a nice little puddle in there, pretty wet in order to get enough of it to make another big puddle right here on the plastic, right? I'm not putting it right on the table, even though it might look that way. It's the plastic cover of the watercolor that I'm doing this on. You could also do it on like a ripped piece of aluminum foil. You could do it on the top of maybe like some type of plastic cap of a carton or a jar, whatever works, just a surface that it doesn't matter that you're putting some paint on top of it. So don't do it right on your table. Again, so I have a nice big puddle of that pure hue of red. Again, I'm gonna wash my brush, or I could use another one. And now, once my brush is nice and washed, now I can get my black nice and wet. Right, because my brush was washed, I'm not getting red into my black. You don't want that. You don't want to mix your colors right on the right in the palette. You can mix them right here in the plastic. So I have that black on my brush, and I suggest putting it next to your red puddle first. If you put it right in the red puddle, then every time you dip it back into the black, it's going to get red in the black. So if you make now your black puddle next to your red, and you don't want it to be as big, it can be a little bit smaller because a little bit of black goes a long way, but make that puddle next to your red puddle, then you can do your mixing all right here. So now I'm mixing my black into my red, and you can see that that red is changing. It's becoming darker, right? It's a darker value. So once my puddle is nice and mixed, then I can, just the same exact way that I spaced out the painting in of the open spaces with my red hue, now I'm gonna do it with my new red shade. All right, so just like I did it before, and you'll see how it's darker, right? And I can put it right next to what I painted before now because they are different. It almost looks brown. It's like a brownish red, kind of like a brick color, right? So take some time to paint all across your sheet with this new red shade. You are still going to be doing some tones and some tints, so you still want to leave a lot of them open, but you want to spread these shades across. Right, so now would be a great time to pause your video and take the time that you need to paint lots of open spaces that are not next to each other with this new red shade. All right, go for it. Next, let's make an even darker shade of your color. So on your palette where you had it mixed, and I actually had to even mix a little bit more because while I was painting that shade I ran out, so I mixed up a little bit more. And when I did it, I noticed that this has a little bit more black in it. So I'm actually now going to use that. So this was a color I really wanted that was with more of the red, but you can see that as you add more black, that shade gets darker. So I'm gonna take a little bit more black, I'm gonna mix it there. Now I'm gonna mix it all together. Right, so I have that very, very dark, it's like a very dark brown, but it is a dark shade of that reddish orange color that I started with. So I have my even darker shade now, so I can go fill some more spaces with that, right? And you can do that as many times as you want. Keep adding black until you have your darkest shade and filling in more of those open spaces. I'm probably gonna stop after this shade, and then I'm gonna move on to show you how to do your tints. But for now, I'm going to fill a bunch in with this dark shade of my reddish orange that I've been working with. Right, so take some time to fill in the spaces with your even darker shade, and if you want, you can add more black after that and fill some more spaces in with an even darker shade. It's up to you. So pause the video, do that, and then we'll be right back. So now when looking at this, you should see the 3 different values of red that we've done so far. We have our pure of the reddish orange that came right from the palette, right? So there's the pure color, the slightly darker value from adding a little bit of black to make a slightly darker shade, and then the even darker spaces where we added even a little bit more black. So now we're going to create the tints, the lighter values of our red. What I did was I got some clean water. Right, so make sure your brush is nice and clean and you have some fresh water. I also took a paper towel and just wiped off where that puddle was so that I don't get those dark, the dark values, the dark shade in what I'm doing now. So if you look on my palette, I do have some white. If you don't have white on your palette, that's okay, right? In order to make a tint, you add white to your color. Again, you would do it over here on the side because you don't want to put the white right into your color on your palette. As you can see, a little black has gotten into my white, so that's what happens when they mix right there. So what I could do is I could put the red over here, and then next to it I'd put the white, right? And that would create my tint, the slightly lighter red color. But I'm going to show you also what you can do if you don't have white on your palette, because not all watercolor palettes have white. So what I'm going to do is, instead of adding white, which is truly how you make a tint, we're going to just add water to lighten it up. So again, I'm going to make a nice big red puddle to the side of where I'm mixing my colors, right? So that nice big red puddle. But instead of adding any color to it this time, I'm just gonna add some water, right? So I'm just adding a lot of water to that red. Adding water. You could even, again, you don't want to spill, but you could very, very carefully do a very small drip. See how when I did that, it created this lighter area? Right, so I really watered it down. So I'm going to put it next to, this was my, I'll scooch it so you can see, this was my pure red hue. What I'm going to do now that I have this watered down red, you'll see that when I paint between it, because there's so much extra water in with the watercolor paint, it creates a lighter color. Now, if I had used white, a similar effect would happen. In fact, I can even show you. Right, so if you have white, then you can do this. Right, so you have your red puddle, wash it off, get your white nice and wet, make your little white puddle, right? All your mixing happens on the side, then mix them together. Right, you can see it becomes a lighter version, right? So even that, I look at that and I think, I want mine even lighter. So what do? I wet my brush, I get more of that white, I put it right next to it, I mix it together, especially right in that area, and then, yeah, there's that lighter color. Right? So depending on if you have white, you can mix your chosen color in white together over on this side and then add it to a bunch of the spaces that are still open. If you don't have white, just on the side, add a lot of water, and then you can color and you can paint in that way. So I'm going to take the time to do that. I'm still going to probably have some open spaces because
and I'll show you what to do after that. So again, fill in as many spaces as you can that are not touching each other with now this lighter tint that you've either created by adding white to your chosen color or adding lots of water to your chosen color. So I'm going to do that, you do that. Makes sense to pause the video to do it. Wow, look at that. We have lots of ranges in the value of our color red. We have the pure hue, we have the lighter tints, and the darker shades. You'll also notice that I chose to leave some of those empty spaces white. You can choose to do so too, or you can make another tint or another shade to add it in, to paint it in, or you could choose to paint it in just a solid black if you wanted. Totally up to you. I want to leave some white because I like the way that that looks. The last step is actually optional. If you want, you could choose to leave it like this, or what I'm going to choose to do is I'm going to take my black marker and I'm going to go over all of my traced lines. This will take some time, so if you feel like I like the way that it is, I am done, then yay, you're done. But I'm going to take the time to go over the edges, and I'll show you in just a bit when I finish tracing all of that. I will show you what that looks like. You want to make sure that your watercolors are nice and dry before you go over it with a marker, however. So just make sure that your whole page is dry before you do so. All right, so you are either done, very nice job, or like me, you might take your black marker and trace over all those lines. The reason that I'm decided to do it is because there are some spaces, like here for example, where I didn't paint perfectly in the lines. Again, there's no such thing as perfect in art. It's just the way that you choose to want it, and I want those lines to be a little bit crisper. So when I go over it with the black marker, it's not as obvious that I didn't paint within the lines as much. All right, so if you want to trace over with the black marker like me, go for it, and I'll be right back. And we're done. Here's my piece. I can't wait to see what you created. I'm actually feeling really proud of this one. I feel like it might be one of my favorite pieces that I've created so far this summer. The reds and the leaves kind of make me think of the autumn season, the fall time, maybe those changing colors of the leaves. So I hope you had fun today, and I hope you feel that you've actually learned a lot, right? We learned about a new word called value. We learned about some other words called tints and shades and tones and hue. Wow, we learned a lot together. So thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you had fun. I really did. I look forward to seeing your artwork, and until next time, bye.